I stood on the doorstep, staring at the shrieking red-headed harpy. The pouring rain made her hair stick to her face in long strands. Despite the cold, pelting rain, she continued her furious tirade. To be honest, I couldn't hear all the words because of the heavy rain and the deafening rumble in my own ears. Nevertheless, I understood the gist of it. My wife Beth was having an affair with the red-headed witch's husband, Justin. The angry redhead, Nicole, Nikki for short, wanted me to stop it. A couple months ago, my wife called me while I was on a rare business trip, and while I watched the cold rain pounding on the dirty hotel room window, she told me she wanted a divorce after 9 years of marriage, because we were separated. I had only been gone a couple weeks, and we had only lived together for 5 months since I came home from the army. I didn't even know we were having problems. She never said a word. As far as I could tell, she'd been at least emotionally involved with this asshole for 3 months, and had probably finally managed to perfect it while I was deployed. I'd only managed to piece it all together a week before the redhead showed up on my doorstep, and I didn't have proof yet. So I tried to devise a plan. My wife had agreed to counseling long before I found out about the affair, but she actually stopped attending our sessions after the second one. I suspected she was trying to get the counselor to reconcile me to the breakup. I think the main reason for the supposed counseling period was so she could tell her family and friends how hard she was trying, especially her parents. Her parents' attitude toward her was very, very important to her, perhaps more important than anything else in her world. So she waited, continuing to date this asshole and living on my paycheck until she was sure it was going to look good and that he was ready to leave his wife and child. Beth and I had 2-year-old twin girls, Angie and Amy. She happily left me to babysit them as soon as I got home so she could go to the gym or go for a run, both of which she did often enough to be in the best shape of her life. But after the gym, she and asshole would slip away to have sex somewhere. Unhappy was hardly the right word for how I felt. Every time I tried to solve problems or talk to her about anything, she would turn into a screaming rage, denying every mistake and blaming me for everything in the world. She spent a lot of time telling me how hard it was for her to watch the kids at home while I was at work, and that I was just trying to use the kids against her, none of which was true or really made any sense. Working full-time, I was doing more with the kids than she was. Reviewing the divorce with an attorney was depressing. Adultery was essentially irrelevant in our state. It had no real effect. And Beth was obviously well aware that the courts almost always award custody and child care payments to the wife, regardless of her behavior. Maintenance for a few years was also the norm if there were young children. That way the ex-wife could stay home and be a good mom instead of rushing off to work. So there stood a squealing, ugly, red-haired, tall, and somewhat clumsy person, with a beak-like nose and thin, angry lips, with a few extra pounds after giving birth to a 6-month-old baby that frankly didn't sit well on her lanky body. Anger and the cold rain made her pale skin blotchy. I couldn't get a word in edgewise, so I stepped back, holding the door open, and waved at her. I'd already realized there was no point in the neighbors hearing a woman yelling at me standing outside. She followed me, loudly degrading my manhood, while I walked over to the dining room table and pulled out a chair for her, then sat down myself, and waited. Gradually, the anger turned into bitter tears, then into shuddering sobs, then finally into sobs. Her head drooped onto her hands on the table, and her hair formed a mound of damp, hairless, dark copper. I waited a little longer until the runny nose stopped. "Are you done?" Quietly. She raised her anger-reddened eyes to me, sniffed her nose twice, but said nothing, and I continued. "If I could do anything, I would. I don't like it any more than you do." I went on to explain how the law works and the disadvantage I was at. "You should kick her cheap slut ass." Not letting go of the anger, not that I blame her. Great plan. Then I could end up in jail and then on the street. We sat in silence for a while until I got up and made hot tea. It was raining cold, a fact indicated by her very obvious nipples sticking out through her shirt and bra. I tried my best not to stare at her. She may not have been pretty, but her breasts had a really good rack, and that was pretty damn strong for me. She shuddered as the hot tea hit her system. Shit, I didn't feel so cold. I didn't say anything, but she suddenly looked down at her breasts. Shit! Shit again. Not much variety. She wrapped her arms around herself. I inwardly sighed. This was the sexiest I'd been in 4 months. I can get you a sweater or something. Which one belongs to that slut? I found one of my hooded sweaters, which she quickly pulled on and buttoned. She started to wriggle, pulled her arms out of the sleeves, and then after a few spins, she dropped the soaked shirt and bra from underneath and slipped her arms back into the sleeves. I picked up the laundry and threw it in the dryer. At least I noticed the show was back on. The sweater alone was thinner than the bra and shirt combined. I grabbed a towel and held it out to her. "Dry your hair. I hate them," she growled. I did too. I never saw this coming. At that moment, I saw a flash of pain that was as intense as my own. I can't compete with her. She's in great shape and gorgeous. I got fat from having a baby. She wasn't really overweight, maybe 10 pounds or so. She just wasn't in shape, but neither was I. But she was right about something. Beth was as beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed, slender, and graceful as a woman could be. And yet Nikki needed something to hold on to. "She's in good shape because she has time to go to the gym and run, and you're not fat at all." A tiny glimmer of something other than misery came out. "So what's next?" I shrugged. "I have no idea. Every time I play this game, I come out alone, broke, and she controls access to the kids. I've told her everything I've been able to piece together. What if you had proof of infidelity?" "It wouldn't matter in court. They don't give a shit here. But the same thing that hurts me should work in your favor in a divorce." "Hardly. Justin works for his cousin at the construction company. Most of his salary is hidden, so there's not much official money for child support for me and the child." She continued, I just want to crush them." I thought for a minute. What could we possibly hurt them with? She shrugged. I started to feel a little better. I finally had an ally in this goat situation. "Seriously, everyone makes mistakes. We just have to find them. An under-the-table paycheck from his cousin might be a good starting point." I wondered. Some of the shoes that had just appeared in Beth's closet looked very expensive. That money had to come from somewhere. There was something going on. Beth was spending some strange money. She nodded with barely a hint of real energy. "We could look into that." I smirked. "It would be easy. We'd round up the kids and sneak around like a bad mix of Magnum P.I. and the Brady Bunch." "No, my sister Angie could watch the kids. She's watching Jamie right now." She paused, looking a little thoughtful. "So, where are your kids?" "Upstairs. Asleep." She looked around the room, her gaze settling on the closed front door. "You have sweatpants. I'm all wet." I pulled out my sweatpants as she took off her shoes. I pointed to the bathroom, but she turned her back to me, unzipped her wet jeans, pulled down her jeans and underwear, and stepped out of them. She then began to wipe her legs and buttocks with a towel rather slowly. The invitation was pretty obvious, and I could almost hear her nerves crackling. I could feel the risk she was taking. She was already feeling rejected. If a guy with a grudge, who had every reason to retaliate, and who, by the way, had been cut off from sex for so long, rejected her, she'd be shattered. I felt a surge of anger, but anger at my wife for setting me up like that. Nikki kept talking. "I can't believe Justin could do this to me." I stepped forward and put my hand on her bare thigh. She trembled and her voice caught in her throat, but she didn't pull away, so I put my other hand on her thigh. "I don't like you, but I hate him." She pushed me away. I stroked her thigh with one hand, and with the other I unzipped her sweater, throwing it to the floor at our feet. And when I gently kissed her neck, letting my teeth touch her skin, her legs nearly gave out. My hand slid around and between her legs. She moaned softly. When it was quiet, she looked up at me and grinned wickedly. She looked at me sullenly from beneath a disheveled mop of red curls. "You knew this was coming when you invited me in." "Not until you took off your jeans, actually." She giggled like a little girl. It was a little unnerving. "I was afraid you'd say no." I smirked, for what I thought was the first time in forever. How can any guy say no to that? Justin has shown no interest in me or the baby since the baby was born. I shook my head. I'd heard of such things before, but before I could say anything, she continued, "So how could Beth, and any woman, turn her back on the sex you just gave me? You're a hell of a lot better than Justin." "I have no idea. She just lost interest in me. Justin's younger, and she's feeling old because of the kids, I guess. That hasn't happened since the twins were born. I think she felt like she needed to be more of a mom to me or something. Nikki giggled again, a little creepily, I thought. I mean, I've tried it, but it didn't work. Before you. I grinned. Beth hadn't, at least. She perked up even more. I can't believe you can't control your whore. I don't like you anyway. Bastard. Bitch. There was anger in our words, but we both realized it wasn't really directed at each other. If you really want to do something about it, see if your sister can watch my kids tomorrow night with yours, and we better get this over with. They'll be home in about an hour, and I need to clean this room up a bit. You better use some air freshener. She pulled on her clothes and ran out of the house. I cleaned the room thoroughly and put the towels in the washing machine along with the clothes. When Beth got home, I found it surprisingly easy to avoid the nightly discussions, the arguments we always had when she denied something and lied about everything. She seemed a little puzzled by my lack of attitude. It's amazing how a big fuck takes the edge off resentment. She also seemed to notice the spotlessly clean kitchen. I think she commented on the air freshener working, but frankly I didn't care. I was on the verge of post-sex hormones. She was just as embarrassed when I missed the almost ritualized failed attempt to kiss her goodbye when I left for work the next morning. I hadn't even tried, and I could see it caught her off guard when I just headed for the exit. One way or another, I was going to quit sitting around feeling miserable and get it over with, any way I could. At work, I arranged to borrow a friend's car for a few months. Nikki's sister, who looked embarrassingly similar to her, stayed to watch the kids at her house. Nikki and I drove. We planned to check out his cousin's construction company trailer. If there was something illegal going on, the trail could have started there. Getting into the car, she wrinkled her nose slightly. This is the first time I've had sex in ages, and you weren't particularly gentle. Don't think you're getting anything tonight. I raised an eyebrow. Tenderness doesn't exactly seem to be on your mind. She smiled slightly, despite her best efforts to suppress a smile. I noticed that for the first time since we'd met, she was wearing a little makeup, albeit poorly. I made the decision to change the plan and drove to the mall. We tried to find something to talk about, but we didn't have much in common, so the conversation flowed in snatches until we pulled into the mall parking lot. She looked puzzled. Are they here? No, but I think we want to hurt them, so there are a few small things that need to be done. What are you talking about? I rolled my eyes. It was just amazing how little Nikki and I had in common. She caught my sardonic look. I don't like you. I don't like you at all. I don't like you either. Bastard. Bitch. I led her over to the makeup counter at Macy's. She gave me a threatening stare. Think of it as a disguise. For the next hour, the two women hovered over her and tried a million makeup combinations, resulting in a surprisingly presentable Nikki, whom they taught to apply their products. She didn't come out quite pretty, but she managed to present a sort of smoldering, hungry sexiness. That'll do it. The kit cost me $100 of grocery money, but I just won't eat lunch at work for the next month, and I'll be fine. We walked back to the car, and she was clutching the little makeup bag like it was the Holy Grail. She didn't mean to like it, but she did. So what does all this mean? If we're going to hurt them, you need something Justin wants, something that he seems to have lost. And I need something that Beth will resent and be jealous of. That would be you. You hide your makeup when you come home and only use it when you and I go out. She looked puzzled, so I explained my whole plan to her. She sat there for a full minute without saying anything. Shit, it's a little complicated, and it's going to take a long time. I shrugged. Do you have a better plan? She smiled slightly. No. She asked to stop by my house to wash off my makeup without Justin noticing. She went into the bathroom and came out of there a couple minutes later with a towel in her hands. She was wearing nothing but an evil smile and the makeup she had to wash off. The evil glint in her eyes told me all I needed to know about her intentions. I looked her over. I thought you said not to expect anything. It would be a shame to waste that makeup. She dropped the towel without ceremony. Eventually, we finished up and headed towards her sister's house. Nikki had enlisted her sister as an accomplice. She obviously never liked Justin, and we would really need her help. Over the next few months, we more or less worked on ourselves. I worked out at work at lunchtime, she worked out at home, And we worked out together in the basement until Nikki lost the baby fat and strengthened everything else. And I got really strong too. We hid it from our self-centered spouses by wearing baggy clothes and just shirking. In any case, they didn't pay much attention to us. We also had sex at least 5 or 6 times a week, more than I ever got from Beth. We were both the stay-at-home mom and family type, so we decided to change that. On a whim, my basement turned into a dance studio. Neither of us knew shit about it, but the magic of YouTube prevailed. We had plenty of free weekends and evenings as our spouses continued to ignore us. We learned basic dance steps, then more advanced ones. We really enjoyed salsa dancing, but we had to save it for the end of our routine, primarily because we would end up sleeping right on the floor. Every single one. Shit. Once. One thing I realized pretty quickly, I was playing with fire. Nikki wasn't very stable and had the temperament of a wild Doberman pinscher. Her moods changed without warning, and almost anything could set off a wave of gratuitous anger. All this crap with Beth and Justin had broken something important, one of those fences of sanity we'd trampled. I always tried to keep my eyes on her, all the time. The only time she seemed stable was when she was coming almost unconscious, or when she was around children, mine or hers. Her love for the kids was all-consuming. She still called me bastard, and I still called her bitch. But the words were, if not exactly loving and sweet, then strangely affectionate. But it was all for us, to make us feel better about ourselves. There was real work to be done, too, and we had to do it very, very carefully. Nikki made up an excuse to visit the construction company's trailer during the day and managed to film the whole thing on her cell phone. It turned out her cousin was too stingy to buy an alarm system. We slipped in there 5 times, took pictures of every document in every file cabinet drawer, and started going through the documents bit by bit. More useful information turned up in Justin's desk and Beth's purse. After a while, neither of us argued with our spouses, which was a problem for Beth. She did seem to miss arguments and try to start arguments for no reason, but I never fell for it. Well, almost never. Honestly, after sleeping with Nikki all day, I didn't have the energy left to argue. It took me a while to realize that Beth was probably using conflict to justify her horrible behavior to herself. She was becoming more and more confused by the day. Justin, on the other hand, seemed to think Nikki had given up altogether. I also got a nice break on the money front. I received my $2,000 deposit. I was putting that money into a vacation bungalow at a Mexican seaside resort to take Beth there for our anniversary, an event that obviously wasn't going to happen. I didn't expect them to refund the money, but they did. Customer relations, I guess. That money will come in handy. When Beth started making excuses to stay the night with Justin, Nikki and I started going to the dance club, gradually trying out the dance moves we'd learned. It was fun, but it was also stressful. Nikki's unpredictability was constantly weighing on me. She was irritable at the best of times and could go from joyful excitement to almost psychotic anger without any warning if provoked. One particular night was a near disaster and reminded me how careful I had to be. By this time, after weeks of exercise and almost daily sex, Nikki was practically radiating sex, so it was no surprise that people would often sneak up on us during dances. She loved the attention, but unsurprisingly she sympathized with the abandoned girlfriends and tried not to show her sexuality with the guys who came with their girlfriends. Unfortunately, some of the guys thought she would dance with them as horny as she danced with me. We got cut off by a couple in a small club somewhere in the middle of nowhere. I was dancing with the girl, a cute little blonde cheerleader, while the guy was obviously trying to put his hands up Nikki's miniskirt. She talked him out of it twice, but he insisted, and I just caught her by the hair as she lunged at him. I said, "Stop!" Her claws nearly grazed his eye, leaving a bloody mark on his cheek. With the little blonde on one side and a hissing, pissed-off Nikki, I expected disaster immediately. The guy quickly backed away, eyes wide, while Nikki slowly turned her back to me, wrapping her long leg around my hips, pressing her groin tightly against me. "You bastard! You pulled my hair! That hurt!" She was silent for a moment, and then she purred. "You really know what I like, don't you?" She looked at the blonde frozen next to me and winked at her. "You can get so much better than this guy. You deserve better. He's an asshole." We walked outside at a fairly brisk pace. It seemed reasonable considering the three guys in security t-shirts heading our way. The parking lot was full of cars, but no people. 2 rows away, I saw a scuffling guy and 2 other guys get out. He headed toward Nikki, and his friends headed toward me. Bitch. Nikki smiled. I don't get it. I introduced myself to you. For that shit, your boyfriend can watch me get what's in your panties. Nikki stopped as if startled, and he reached for her, preparing to grab her arms. But I could see the manic glint in her eyes as I felt the biggest of the 3 come up behind me. Nikki lunged, not with her hands, which he grabbed, but with her teeth, sinking them deep into his face. He let out a shrill scream of terror and pain. I turned around. I wasn't an MMA champion, but I was more than familiar with fighting, and I'd seen the frantic look in Nikki's eyes, so I was ready. The big guy was expecting a takedown or a punch, but he was distracted by his friend's yell and was completely knocked down when I landed a hard elbow strike to his face. As he was expecting a savage blow, he dived right into the elbow, which crunched him on the nose. He went down. The other guy stepped forward to pull Nikki away from her screaming victim, so I kicked him in the back of the leg, just below the knee, and he fell to his knees. I grabbed his head and threw him backwards like a soccer ball, letting him clink against the pavement. Nikki's victim tripped over a curbstone and covered his face, blood spurting from it. Huge mistake. Nikki spat out a mouthful of flesh and drove her sharp heel into his groin. His scream ripped beyond human hearing. I yanked her back as she was about to kick him in the chest. "Nikki, stop!" She gave me a wildly defiant look, then stopped and smiled. Blood covered the lower half of her face and most of the front of her white tank top. Her smile was full of blood, a scene from one of those epic Hammer Studios vampire movies. She turned around and put her hands on the nearest car, standing almost over her gasping victim. Then she saw the grief-stricken blonde and headed toward her. I wanted to grab her and run, but I knew that would bring on the rage, and if I didn't get her out of here quickly, we'd both be in jail by morning. She walked over to the obviously paralyzed blonde and stood over her. "Nikki, behave yourself. She didn't do anything wrong." Nikki looked up at me and smiled. Her face was still a bloody mask of horror. "Oh, I know." She pulled the blonde to her and kissed her hard. I was about to intervene when I realized the blonde was passionately kissing her back. Nikki slowly let her go. The blonde looked at her like she was hypnotized, and her face was stained with her boyfriend's blood. Trust me, you can find much better than him. As soon as we got in the car, Nikki took off her tank top and wiped her face. About 2 miles away, an ambulance whizzed by. I didn't have to guess where it was going, and could only hope no one had written down our license plates. I pulled into the parking lot to give Nikki my shirt, but getting dressed wasn't her immediate interest, so I reclined the seat and let her unzip and ride me until she was satisfied. It took a long time. My pants were soaked with her juices before she was even done. She was silent for a few minutes, and then commented, "I really screwed up, didn't I? We're all like that in some way. I did get off on it, though. Hurting him felt so good." "Uh-huh. I've noticed. It's a little Hannibal Lecter-esque disturbing. Hurting him was like fucking him. I was able to just let all my anger out. He deserved it. Well, I'm not sure the law would agree, but I think his girlfriend was okay with it." Nikki giggled. She stuck her tongue in my mouth first. "Shit, I'm competing with someone." She was quiet for a moment. "Seriously. About inflicting pain, don't let me do it again, promise me, very seriously." Tears glistened in her eyes. "You were defending yourself." "I know, but that's not the point. I wanted to hurt him. So much, so much, so much. If it happens again, what if I can't stop? What if I can't find my way back?" She suddenly spoke like a lost little girl afraid of the dark. It honestly scared the hell out of me. Nikki probably needed real help, medication. Hell, she probably needed tests. We did the paperwork. The brutal assault in the parking lot was attributed to a gang of 6 men and a Hispanic woman, witnessed by a blonde girl whose name was actually Amber. I had to laugh about that when I showed the paperwork to Nikki. "So, looks like you made an impression on Amber after all." Nikki smiled. "She seemed nice." Strawberry lip gloss. "Do you like girls?" I didn't realize I did. I just dabbled with her at the club. But the parking lot was a different story. She wanted me. I could feel it, and it made me want her. And since you and I have been together, I just don't have any boundaries when it comes to sex. After that incident, however, Nikki seemed to take care of herself. It got better. Slowly, unevenly, but gradually better. I could see her fighting to keep the demon at bay when it showed up. Sometimes she even won. Nikki's sister couldn't watch the kids every night, so Nikki would often bring Jamie over, and we would practice putting them to bed. As we stood in the doorway checking on them, I would sometimes furtively glance at Nikki and marvel at the softness of her expression. And sometimes she caught my gaze and gave me a sad, soft, half smile. At times like that, her demons seemed very distant. I knew something was going to happen sooner or later. Eventually, Beth came across me shirtless, noticed that I had lost weight and gained new muscle, and commented on it. I didn't turn it into an argument, put my shirt on, and left the room. More than anything, I wanted her not to see Nikki's nail marks on my back and ass from last night. Beth's increased suspicion meant we had to move on to the next stage. I said this to Nikki. So, a few days later, instead of sports and sex, we had a car and a nice digital camera we'd borrowed, and when Beth and Justin left, we quietly followed at a distance. Nikki checked receipts and credit card bills until we figured out their structure. Beth was careful, but in Justin's mind, Nikki was overwhelmed, incapable of self-defense, so he was careless and stupid. Justin's parents had a small cabin on the beach, tucked away in the woods. It was a little dilapidated, but judging by the mileage of the car, it was where they went on Fridays when they missed the gym completely. We pulled off the road and moved quietly toward the camera shack. There were no curtains, so it wasn't hard to find them and see them. By the time we got into position, they were already lying naked on the bed. I carefully and quietly took pictures while Nikki and I watched. When Justin started to come down, Beth jerked her mouth away, catching most of the spray on her face and in her hair. I could see her scolding him for not warning her, but he just laughed. I took a few more pictures. Since we had to walk back to the car, I let some air out of one of Justin's tires to slow them down in case they tried to leave early. We dropped off the film at a photo lab that specialized in discreet one-day photos and then headed home. Beth arrived much later than usual, with disheveled clothes and hair. Giggling, Nikki told me the next day that Justin had changed a tire and then picked up a nail in the road on the way home, resulting in a miserable walk in the rain to a gas station 4 miles away. As they used to say in the Army, payback's a bitch and her stripper's name is Karma. Over the next week, we talked about what we wanted. Nikki surprised the hell out of me, but eventually I agreed. We kept quiet, and then made our big move about 3 weeks after we had gathered our evidence. Beth and Justin always disappeared all day on Saturdays, but Nikki and I put their pattern together. First to the gym, then to a cubicle for sex and showers, then to a nightclub for dancing and partying. They usually got home around 6 or 7 on Sunday mornings. This time, though, it was a little different. As soon as they left, we left the kids with Nikki's sister and headed out. We went shopping first. Nikki chose a tight-fitting dark emerald dress with a deep, deep neckline and a very short hem. The emerald green color really set off her hair. I was wearing a dark gray suit with a black shirt. I took her to the hair salon and told them to go for it, hair and makeup. After getting dressed, we headed to the club. We walked in like the place belonged to us. Technically, the bouncer was supposed to hold us up, but Nikki looked like real sex on a stick. She was wearing a dress as thin as tissue paper that showed almost everything, and it was obvious she didn't have a stitch underneath. When the light fell directly on her, you could even make out the tiny heart where she'd trimmed her pubic hair. Since part of the bouncer's job is to make sure the crowd is interesting, we were let through without even requiring a card. We were the first to hit the dance floor, then moved on to the main event. Justin and Beth sat in the club at the matrimonial table in the corner every Saturday. After dancing a few songs, we headed over to their table, Nikki at her full height holding onto my arm. Beth was in a yellow dress I'd never seen, Justin in a blue suit. I'd be lying if I said Nikki looked better than Beth. Beth was tanned and elegant. However, Nikki was spectacular, and instead of looking elegant or sophisticated, she proudly wore the look of a bad girl of pure sex and immorality who drew stares from across the room. I pushed back the chair for Nikki and sat down myself. Beth and Justin seemed frozen in absolute shock. I looked around with feigned surprise. Very nice. Most gyms are less fancy. Justin's face darkened. He fixed his gaze on Nikki. That dress. You spent money on— No. I cut him off with a harshness in my voice. I bought it. I threw a stack of pictures of the cabin on the table. They were the most unsightly ones I could pick out. Most of the pictures I'd taken were considerably kinder. After all, they were beautiful people. I went through the stack and pulled out the worst. They looked sad, clumsy, and dirty. I got back part of my deposit for the bungalow at the Mexican seaside resort I was going to surprise Beth with on our anniversary. Since that wasn't going to happen, I decided to buy something useful. Something flashed across Beth's face. Disappointment? Maybe. Probably at finding out there was more money than she thought. Looking at the spread of photos, Justin finally sensed danger and stunned. Beth turned pale. So how long? We've been working together for almost 4 months now. How did you know everything? I didn't really need to find out anything. You didn't even try to hide it. You just assumed we'd be too depressed or too weak to do anything. Justin tried to regain some equilibrium and grinned derisively. So what? You two fell in love with each other? Nikki grinned. I don't like him at all. He's a total bastard. And she's a real bitch. I don't like her at all. Nikki's predatory smile grew wider and wider. But the sex? Oh my God, it's amazing. There's nothing like furious revenge sex. Every nasty thing imaginable. She gave Beth a death stare. And a hell of a lot of things you'd never do. I know I wouldn't. But family meanness had convinced the girl to try all kinds of new sex. She sang the last phrase, glancing involuntarily at Justin. Beth recoiled like a slap and looked at me. You can't do that. We were trying to work together. Well, that was bullshit. I laughed, but without any mirth. You stuck around until that asshole was ready, and slept with him 3 or 4 times a week while I babysat the girls and lived like a fucking monk. For months I had people coming to my office to give me bad news. Not only were you cheating, but you turned it into a fucking public spectacle. We didn't need surveillance to catch you. It was all out in the open. I could feel the anger building quickly, but Nikki squeezed my leg. Nikki was cooler this time. She had the upper hand. Obviously, divorces will be for adultery. It won't make any difference in money, but let's face it, it's more honest. And it will make us feel better about ourselves. My new hobby will be making sure everyone gets copies of the photos and a full explanation of how you destroyed your marriages. Family, co-workers, employers. Hell, I'll track down your first-grade Sunday school teacher. She focused on Justin for a second. By the way, asshole, I'm moving in with my sister for now, with Jamie. Straightening my head, I threw the ball in. A little more serious for you is the fact that the two of you embezzled money from the building materials account at the construction company. It took us a long time to figure it out, but when Nikki realized that the two of you were spending like sailors on vacation, we knew the money had to come from somewhere. Nikki and I have gathered more than enough evidence. There are tax issues, wire fraud, even one case of mail fraud. So even if Justin's cousin is okay with it, you have a real problem. You're probably looking at 5 to 10 years in prison, I pointed at Justin, and a couple years as an accessory to murder for you, Beth. Eyes wide, Beth immediately tried to justify herself. I didn't know. I thought it was his money. I put it in an account to keep it from getting divorced. I cut her off. Yes, you were holding it for a friend. Besides, that puts that money in line with our divorce. If my name was on that account, I would assume you were setting me up. That would have ended very badly. Beth and Justin turned pale. I suspected they had considered the idea, but apparently decided against it. I made the counterproposal that Nikki and I had already worked out. You have one chance for a better future, Justin. Grab it. Quit your job and head for the mountains. At least 400 kilometers. Take your car, your clothes, your soccer trophies, and your yearbook. Nothing else. Not one goddamn thing. Nikki's filing for divorce. She ain't getting shit out of the divorce anyway, considering your secret deal with your cousin. We don't testify to the cops or your cousin. If your cousin finds out on his own and takes action, that will be your problem. I would suggest putting any money you still have back into his firm's account. It could make a difference in whether he starts looking for you. I looked at Beth. I'm filing for divorce. I have primary custody, no alimony, and no maintenance, with adultery as the cause. You either agree to it or you go to jail and I just take full custody. As for all our shit, make a list of whatever you want, but it better be short. You can keep your clothes, and you can keep all your goddamn shoes. That's when Nicky stepped in. He offered me your stuff, but the shoes are too small and the clothes suck. I stopped wearing underwear around him so you can keep your granny panties. I smiled at Nicky while Beth tried her best not to choke. I continued, get a fucking job, move in with your parents, or whoever, I don't care. You'll have lots of play dates with your kids. I won't block it out. You've been a halfway decent mom. I won't even tell your parents what the reason for the divorce is. I looked carefully into their eyes to make sure they were paying attention to me. Time runs out tomorrow at midnight. If Justin's fucking ass isn't on the fucking road by then, we'll turn everything over to his cousin and the cops. The offer only stands if you both agree. Nicky leaned forward, showing off her spectacular cleavage, probably for Beth's sake. You guys have managed one amazing accomplishment, the two of us. We were serious when we said we had nothing in common. We couldn't agree on a movie. We hated each other's music. And if he talked about his hobbies, I'd go into a coma. And she's a petty, emotional harpy whose voice rattles my nerves like broken glass, I added. Nicky continued, looking Justin in the eye like a snake at its prey. So when we got together and didn't figure out how to fuck you, we only did one thing. Screwing each other's brains out was all there was to it. If we had dinner together, it was only to build up our strength to sleep together again. She looked at Beth. I can't believe you dumped him for that piece of shit. I'm not bluffing. If that's what you think, come with us sometime, and you can watch. It'll probably be even hotter that way, if that's even possible. I looked at my watch and interrupted her. Remember the deal. Sorry, we have to go so I can pick up the kids. I stood up and held out my hand to Nicky. She obeyed and leaned toward them, telling me, come on, we'll have sex again. Stop on the way back and I'll do it every way I can. Hateful woman. She wasn't lying or exaggerating, though. We were staying at a hotel, and she was absolutely nuclear hot. Apparently, after telling Justin and Beth everything, she turned on full blast. An hour later, we were on our way home. We had outdone ourselves. Something in Nicky had changed. Perhaps it was the confrontation with Justin and Beth, but the crazy anger seemed to be gone. Just gone. She was still as sexually aroused as ever, but that sparkling edge of true madness was gone. Beth almost beat me to it. I'd just put the kids to bed when she flew in the front door, and she stopped talking. I purposely hadn't showered, and I reeked of Nicky. And Beth always had a sensitive nose. The air freshener was a major player in keeping our secret. We needed to talk. I sank into the padded chair. We should have talked months ago. Look, can we back off a little bit? You can't just let that bitch destroy us. Stop, I raised my hand. The one bitch who destroyed a marriage is standing in front of me. She stared at me with a particularly nasty look. A rarity for her. You really don't understand, Beth. Compared to Justin, your fate is sweet. Nicky bargained for you, talked and begged for you. She tried to make Justin the real villain in this mess, and you have no idea how hard it was for her. She hated you with every fiber of her being, but she did it anyway. She feels like her train wreck caused ours. I'm not even sure I agree with that, but I made a deal, because she begged me to. I was quiet for a moment, drying up my anger before it exploded. Then, in measured tones, if the money laundering account had been opened in my name, or if the twins' DNA analysis had turned out differently, we wouldn't be having this conversation. They're pouring the foundation for the 5th Street factory, and I have a copy of the key to the site. You, an asshole, would just disappear. Nicky could have begged for anything, but it wouldn't have mattered. She blinked, suddenly realizing with horror how one-on-one we were. How much time do I have to move out? I should give you until midnight tomorrow just for the fucking elegant symmetry of it all, but I'll give you a week. It's going to take 2 days to pack all these shoes, and God knows I want them gone. She muttered something like an apology and headed up the stairs. It took her 5 days to move out, and I was left alone with the kids. Even with the twins, things seemed pretty empty. I heard that Justin's cousin was looking for him, but not calling the police. I hope Justin hid himself well. His cousin has always been prone to violence. I may have cheated a little on my promise not to report anything to his cousin. 2 weeks after that, I let the twins stay with Beth and her parents for the weekend. They clearly knew the rules, and Beth understood just as clearly that the retribution for any nonsense would be a quick trip to jail. Near midnight, there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, Nikki was standing there in full battle coloring and club clothes, looking almost giddy. At least someone was fitting in. So she was gone? I nodded. Back at my parents' house, trying to explain a mysterious copy of a divorce petition that said, "House Slut," in bright red lipstick. Thanks for sending it over. Nikki grinned her crazy smile. Great! I wanted to do something nice for her, give them something to talk about. I grinned. I had promised not to say anything to Beth's parents, but Nikki hadn't. In fact, she'd promised the opposite. So a whole series of packages were sent to Beth's friends and family, with pictures. I doubt she'll ever really get over it. Nikki's smile got even wider. Hey, I brought a housewarming gift. I almost corrected her. After all, I hadn't moved in, but she was right about something. The house seemed new. I guess we could share dessert. A familiar face in a light-colored cap peeked out from behind her back. I brought buttercream puffs. Poor Amber. She didn't have much experience, and the two of us shared it like candy, which she basically was. We dragged her into our storm. She wasn't so much a partner as a catalyst on an open fire. The next morning, she helped Amber, who could barely walk on shaky legs, out to her car. A few nights later, Nikki came alone. A few days later, she came in with Jamie. When the kids were asleep, she silently dragged me straight to the bedroom. We moved slower this time, much slower. Then I lay staring at the ceiling, her head resting on my shoulder while her finger drew a pattern on my chest. We can't go on like this, Nikki. I felt her tense up. I continued. We kind of agreed. I know we never said it explicitly, but I think we agreed that we had nothing in common, no feelings, and I have a problem with that. Silence. Then silence. Motherfucker. Then I felt her crazy, familiar smile against my shoulder as her fingernail drew a heart-shaped line over mine. Your kid was probably a dumbass. Did they have to bring in a specialist to teach you how to walk? Bitch. Beth may not have been burned enough, but it was Nikki's choice, and Nikki is complicated and possibly insane, so it's very hard to understand her choice. Maybe she believes in a small chance of salvation, at least for some. Or maybe she wants Beth to see what she's lost. Make no mistake, Beth has lost everything she really valued. Nikki made damn sure of that. And I'm sure Nikki wouldn't be so pleased if Beth was in jail. Nikki wouldn't be able to enjoy the show. Nikki would even have real control over Beth's access to her own daughters after a while. All of this from that first day standing in the rain may have been her plan all along. Honestly, I'm not sure, and I don't want to ask. She might just answer. Nikki holds a permanent place in my heart. She may not be as pretty as Beth, but so what? She loves fiercely and wholeheartedly and won't let go until she crumbles to dust. She's gotten Amber back many times, but Amber isn't a threat to the relationship. She's something Nikki wants to share with the man she loves. As Nikki said, Amber is pretty much a treat, that extra piece of cheesecake that you can't eat on your own, but are happy to share. Nikki just expresses her love in a slightly unconventional way. Sure, she's manipulative and crazy, maybe even dangerous, but she's her.